Okay.
Hi Barry,
Hi.
good to see you again. How are you?
Wonderful.
Everything
Gosh, it's been
okay?
a long time.
Long
Yeah,
time no
wonderful.
see, maybe a couple of weeks or so.
Okay.
Okay.
Shalom. Welcome to Kibbutsamiyad. Now, my name is Barry, and I've been a member of the kibbutz now for 54 years. That is, I came out here in 1968. You might tell from my accent, well, no, I'm not from Australia, not from South Africa, but indeed from Britain. I was born and bred in Manchester. And there, as a teenager, I belonged to a Jewish, Zionist, socialist, pioneering youth movement. So it's not by chance that a few of us decided that together we were going to come out to Israel. Also not by chance why we came to Amiyad, but that's another story. Now, the first kibbutz, the name is Degania, and it's on the southern tip of the Kinneret, and it was founded in 1910. That is 122 years ago. The people who founded it came from Russia. They were young Jewish revolutionaries who were greatly influenced by two major events. The first was the first Russian Revolution, which for the most part failed. But the second major event was the plight of the Jewish people, going back, if you will, to slavery in Egypt, and then onwards throughout the centuries, always being moved from place to place, of massacres, of persecution, and they were greatly influenced by that. And again, the idea and the ideals of the Russian Revolution, which had failed. At that time, land was being bought by the Jewish National Fund, which had been set up by the Zionist organization to acquire land in this country. They understood that the only way that they could survive in this environment here was as a collective together. They believed that they were coming to this land to create a Jewish working class. That is to say, they didn't want a land that someone signed a contract and said, oh, this is yours. They were coming because they said, we are going to take on the responsibility of creating the Jewish state for the future with our own hands in this land. And the central theme of this idea of the Jewish working class was, of course, labor, work. So much so that the idea of labor almost became a religion. That which is going to redeem the Jewish people is labor, is the work of the Jewish people with their own hands in this land. So as I mentioned, they understood that the only way they could do this, because of the environment that they found themselves, was as a collective, as a group together, as a kibbutz. Now in those days, what would it mean to live together as a kibbutz? One of the major central themes was no private property. We are all equals, living together, and this is 50 years before John Lennon, no private property. So what does no private property mean? It means that when you go to the laundry, and you've thrown your dirty clothes in, you now go to the clothing store. According to sizes, whatever's on the top of the pile is yours. The top shirt is yours. The top trousers is yours. The top underwear is yours. So now I'm going to take you on a journey of the awakening of Utopia, and we'll look at it through the eyes of Kibbutsamiyad. Okay, so what I would like you to see is the building here behind me. This is the members' clubhouse, which was in the early days open every night of the week. It would be open, there'd be coffee, there'd be tea, there'd be biscuits, there'd be cakes, there'd be games there, there'd be chess. backgammon, and people would come, and sometimes there'd be a talk. Sometimes somebody had gone on a trip and they brought slides. So now what I'd like you to see is the building behind me. This is the communal dining room. Every kibbutz has a communal dining room. You could land here from Mars, see this building, see this communal dining room and say, oh, I know where I am. I'm on a kibbutz. Here we ate all our meals, breakfast, lunch, supper, dinner. Here during the winter months we had our activities. It might be a wedding, a bar mitzvah, other festivities would be held here. Here in the evenings also the works organizer would sit here. We all just about had permanent work, which could be for 2, 3, 4 years. And some of us moved around at the various jobs that needed doing. So at this desk of the work organizer, along would come the manager of the citrus groves, and he would say, look, I've just got a call from the local packing station. They need 2 tons of fruit by the end of the day tomorrow. I need an extra 3 people. So the work organizer would look and say, okay, you can take 2 from the orchards, 1 from the metal workshop, and then the manager of the orchards come along and say, oh no, I've got a big irrigation problem tomorrow. I've got to fix the pipes, fix the taps. And then they begin to argue, and then the whole dining room's there, and they begin to join in the argument, because that's the way that was there. We didn't just eat at the dining room, we worked in the dining room. That is to say, we were the ones that cleaned up, washed the dishes, we did the cooking. We were totally involved in the dining room. It was in the early days when we had a young factory that the manager of the factory had invited clients from Italy to come and see our new product. So he sat with them in a meeting, and then at some point he looked at his watch and said, oh, look, I've got to go now. When you've finished your, I've got to go now. Please, when you're ready, go up to the dining room to have your dinner. Oh, so they went up to the dining room to have their dinner, and who did they see there giving out the food? Was the manager of the factory. And who cleaned up after them and washed the table down? It was the manager of the factory. Here in this dining room was the one fridge of the kibbutz. We, the members of the kibbutz, lived in one room, what one might call a bed-sitting room. So at this wonderful British celebration of tea time, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we would get up from our room, come to the one fridge in the dining room, take our milk, take some jam, there'd be bread, there'd be a bread slicing machine, and we'd take it back to the room, and then later in the evenings, we'd be able to go to the clubhouse that we spoke about. Okay, we're going to move on from here. Okay, so what I'd like you to see now again is the view behind me, is of the lawns and the trees and the bushes and the hill you can just make out. I mean, really, what a beautiful place to have a kibbutz. I mean, if I wanted to start a kibbutz, if you wanted to start a kibbutz, wouldn't you want to pick this place to start your kibbutz? Now, in 1946, that's 2 years before the State of Israel, a small group called, in Hebrew, the Palmar, which is an acronym for the striking force of the then underground Jewish Defense Force. That small group was sent to this spot in order to guard the major road that runs by the kibbutz. This road is called Route 90. Even then in 1946 was the major road, as it is today, going from the center of the country up into northern Galilee. So they were sent here to guard that road. In those days, along that road was moving munitions, water, building materials, and there were marauding bandits in the area. So they were told, this is the place you have to be. However, when they stood here, they didn't see what you're seeing. Now you have to see how this works. This is what they saw. So you can see here, you can just about make out the hill faintly in the background. So what they were met with was the stones and the rocks, and even this rock just over here gives you a sense of some of the rocks that they found here. There was also no water here. The nearest water source was the springs in Rosh Pina. So every day a trailer with a horse with a tank on it went up to Rosh Pina. Roads weren't roads in those days. By the time it got here, it was half empty. And they would just turn around, leave the water here in Amiyad and a big tank and back to Rosh Pina. And that would be the job for 2 or 3 people every day, just bringing the water to here. So no water, only rocks. There was 23 of them. And they understood that they were on a mission. That is to say, they had no choice. They were here to defend the road under whatever the conditions there were. 1948 came along, and now the Jewish state was formed, and these guys here from the Palmar, from that group, turned around and said, that's it, we're out of here. Rocks, no water, just the 23 of us. And the authorities came along and said, okay, we're bringing in the bulldozers, we'll get out the rocks. We're going to give you extra land further north of here. We're going to give you land by the Lake Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Water we're going to bring from over the top of the hill. There's a spring down at the bottom of the other side by the siphon method of a pipe bringing the water to here. And as far as extra people, we are going to turn to the Jewish, Zionist, socialist, pioneering youth movements in Britain and in Holland to bring more people here. And that's exactly what happened. And that is the beginning of Amiyad. Now, I mentioned before of this building, the dining room, the communal dining room, that we all ate all our meals here. So my question is, who didn't eat here? Who did not eat in the communal dining room? And whilst we're pondering that thought, I will give you the answer: the children. They were not allowed in the dining room. They were forbidden to enter the dining room. So now we're going to go and find, where are the children? Pause. Okay, so the reason that we've stopped here on our way to find the children is because I'd like to for you to see this wall that is over here. This wall, the Mosaic, was created for our 60th anniversary about 14 years ago. And it's where people came, and it was a long weekend, including a festival, and shade was put over the top, and there was tables and there was chairs, and each family was given a leaf, as it were, as you can see here. The leaf was made of netting. They were given ceramics and tiles and glass, bits and pieces, together with a hammer and pliers and glue. And each family was asked to create their logo as they saw their heraldry. And you can see in each of the leaves the names of the different families. Now, the reason specifically I'm showing you this is because one sometimes has a concept of kibbutz as, oh, it's all equal, sort of mediocrity. And I think that what happens here is that each family is trying to show their individual color, their individual independence. We are all different from each other. And from that independence that we're showing comes, if you look at the whole picture, the interdependence of each family here within the community of the kibbutz. So it's from the independence to the interdependence, and now I'm going to add another word, dependence. And it's that idea of dependence maybe has something to do with the reason that kibbutz had to change. About 17 to 20% of the officers in the army were kids brought up on a kibbutz, because they were the ones who went forward. They were the ones who cared for others and knew that when something had to be done, they were the ones that were going to do it. They were the ones who were going to take responsibility. Having said that, I thought that what I've just said is a thing of the past. But in fact, I noticed that this last Yom Ha'atzmaut, the president, as he does every year on Yom Ha'atzmaut, gives out excellence awards to 120 soldiers. And this year, I happened to notice in a kibbutz newspaper that he had given, of the 120, 6 were kids who had grown up on a kibbutz. Only one of them is an officer, another is a corporal, a sergeant, they're all different. And then I began to think, 6? That's already more than 5% of the kibbutz population today, which I'm not quite sure what it is. It's probably less than 1% of the major population, but this is 5% of those who receive the Excellence Award. So maybe there is something still in the air. Okay, so the system has changed, and now the question is, we're going to get run over by the kids looking for, and what are they looking for? They're looking for a bedroom. They're looking for a bedroom because we have said that the parents are living in just one room. So where are these kids now going to sleep? So what do? We add a room on to everybody's house. And now we've added a room on, so where are the parents now in the evening? They're at home. So who's going to the clubhouse in the evenings? Oh dear. And a fridge, and one fridge. You know, now I've got the kids at home, I need a fridge at home. In 1968, television was introduced. In 1968, television was introduced into Israel, and Amiyad bought one, and that one was in the clubhouse. But now, the parents are at home, they have the fridge at home, they're now cooking at home in the evenings, they want to be with their kids in the evenings and at night. So now everybody needs a television. And so our life begins to change, and this could be pointed at as a watershed in the life of the ideology of kibbutz, from the collective and the communal to the family and the individual. So, as time progressed, with the changes that have occurred, from the children sleeping in the children's houses to the children sleeping at home, to the move to much more family-oriented, but together with this, outside influences, particularly economic influences that already started in the 1980s, where the kibbutz movement had invested monies without them being related to the cost of living index, and the whole thing fell, and the kibbutz movement went into, in the particular individual kibbutzim, into large debts. That pushed forward the need for change on the kibbutzim, and if you like, in a lack of confidence of the future of the kibbutzim to look after themselves. And so we moved slowly towards the idea of privatization, that is, taking the total community assets and dividing them up amongst the members. Part of this was very difficult to say the least, because of course you won't start dividing up an orchard or a dairy or a beef herd, but nevertheless solutions were found along the way. But the major issue, of course, in privatization was the house in which one lived and the plot upon which the house was built. This was now going to go over to in the name of the people living in that house. This was a very complicated issue. We needed to do a whole Excel of balances between those people in small houses who'd lived here a long time and those people in large houses who had only been here a short time. Seniority became the key to work this whole thing out. But eventually, one way or another, we worked it out. And what I would like to show you, and we're going to look over here, is the original, more or less, how the original rooms looked. You can see here in this row, there are actually 4 doors. Four doors. The first one, the next one, the third one, and behind that plastic screen there's a 4th door. These are very similar to the rooms that we lived in those early days. We're going to move along here to the plot next to it, and on this plot it was originally exactly the same 4 rooms, but this plot, you can see, has been renovated. So it's moved from the original to the renovation, and we're going to look at the 3rd plot here, which again was originally just like the first one, with 4 rooms. And the white, and you can see the white house, which in fact they took down altogether the original 4 rooms, the row, and have rebuilt completely from scratch. And in a sense, this is like a metaphor for what has happened over time on the kibbutz. That is to say, we start with the 4 rooms, we then go into renovation, and in some cases we just take it all down and rebuild from there. I'll carry on and mention that a few years ago Amiyad did a demographic research and found that the average age on Amiyad was 62 years old, which one can imagine doesn't bode well for the future. So we have gone on a very aggressive demographic program, and we are building a new neighborhood, and some 50 families have already signed up and are building houses there. All of them have to become members of the kibbutz. That is to say, they cannot build here or live on Amiyad if they are not members. The most important group of people that we wanted to bring back, of course, was our children. And my son, who had gone out to study at the Technion, which is Israel's MIT, as it were, technological university, he and his wife, who was also perchance from Amiyad, they, after studying, went out to work in Tel Aviv. Then their first child was born, and then they realized that the place they wanted to be was within a community, within the kibbutz, near home, familiar surrounding, and involved particularly in the community. And what we did was we took that original children's farm, which no longer exists, we created 10 plots there, and it was for our children, and they were all gobbled up. And they're continuing to come back. And so this is the situation we are in today, of a privatized community with a successful, as it seems at the moment, certainly, of new people coming in and joining us.
Okay, Barry, I'm going to ask you a question at this stage.
We talk in Hebrew about hafratah, which in English is privatization. And how long ago did you start the privatization here in Amiyad of taking communal assets and taking them all of the way to ownership by individual members? How many years has this been going on, and what stage have you reached?
All right, we started in the early 1990s. And we started, in a sense, I suppose you could call it an experiment, but it's an experiment you can't go back on. That is to say, once you go, you go. And it started with the dining room. We started with the dining room because we understood that the communal dining room, and there's an expression that, you know, socialism is for the wealthy. And the dining room, that a lot of food was being wasted. Because you just walked in, you took your food, you sat down. And so what we did was we took the budget of the food that was kibbutz put aside every year. We cut it down by 1/3, I think. We then divided that amongst the members in their annual budget, individual budget. And that was the first privatization. And for me, I have to say, horror of horrors. Walking into my communal dining room, and there is a what's it called?
Word in Hebrew, English?
No,
What?
in English.
The word in it, what do you call it? A cash register.
A cash register.
Yeah, like in a cafeteria. Okay.
And there was a cash register. This was in the early 90s, and I've hardly ever been able to go back into that dining room since, because it was such an important part of our life, of people meeting together and so on. And now you went in, you had to pay for your food, less people were coming, they'd eat at home. If you've already got the money, why spend it there? Buy your own food and eat at home. So that's the beginning of privatization at Amiyad.
Okay.
But I'm going to tell you about all sorts of other things.
About the assets now, the main. Okay, we talked about the dining room, the houses, the privatization. How did that go?
Well, like I say, it was a question of balancing out between all the different members according to the size of the house and their seniority on the kibbutz. It didn't go easy. It took her 2 or 3 years to work it all out.
Was there any jealousy involved? The people who'd been here longer?
I'm not sure I'd call it jealousy, but there are in some cases
conflict,
where
say.
people got small plots because that's all they could have, because that's where their house was.
Yeah.
And it might have been surrounded by paths and so on. And some people got large plots. I wouldn't call it quite jealousy, but there was a feeling of unfairness.
Yeah. Okay.
But we balanced that out financially. That is, those with large plots, with large houses paid into the fund, and those with smaller plots and maybe smaller houses received from the fund. It wasn't large sums of money, but at least it was some sort of compensation.
Okay, so where have you reached now in August 2022?
Oh, I would say Amiyad is pretty much completely privatized, but then we see ourselves, and this I'll come up as I talk about later, as a community. That is, we're not giving up on the community. In other words, we all pay taxes into the community, as we do to the government and the local council and so on. And the swimming pool is if you like, a communal venture. There are those people on the kibbutz who say, but I don't use the swimming pool. Why should I pay tax to the swimming pool? Let people who want to use the swimming pool pay for the swimming pool. Or the landscape gardening. We decide together what is the quality of the landscape gardening we have here. And this could mean hiring an extra 1 or 2 people to work in that branch on a communal fund. In other words, we still have these weekly meetings and we still have lots to talk about.
Tell me, Barry, who owns the land here?
Well, the government owns the land.
So you're talking about privatization of the building as an asset, but not the land?
No.
Okay.
We are all signed on leasing the plot that our houses are
I
bought
see.
in. As it is known, 90% of the land in Israel is owned by the government. You have to lease the land. Israel, North Korea and Albania, 3 countries in the world where the government owns the land. And as a citizen, all you can do is lease the land from the government for 49 years, or in some cases 99 years. So so we have to sign this lease, which we all have done, to have this land in our name registered.
So that's what's known in England as a leasehold as opposed to freehold.
If you say so.
I'm sure of it. Anyway, and what is the legal step, apart from the internal decision within Amiyad
Just a minute.
to...
Someone else is coming you might want to see.
Okay, all right, we'll catch up with them in a moment.
No, you won't.
All right, I'll stop here.
Angie! Now it's the building over here. This building was the first brick building built at Amiyad. Up until the time this was built in about 47, 48, the members lived in wooden huts. So my question is, for whom was this first building built of brick? Why was it felt necessary to build this building of brick? And the answer I will give you, and actually I'm going to show you a picture, okay, of how the building looked after it had been immediately built. And maybe you can see in the picture a hint of why it was built. And it was built for the first baby that was born here. And again, education was children was the central focus of the life of the kibbutz, because all of this was about the future. All the work that was being done here, the pioneering and so on, was always with an eye to the future. The children's house, the baby's house, was in later years they went into houses of the area we were in before, but this was the first use of this building. Interestingly enough, although related to the children sleeping in the children's houses as a children's community, like a small kibbutz, as an ideological kingpin anchor to the kibbutz, research has shown that if one looks at the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, there was terrible disease in this country, malaria and so on. There was a very, very high infant mortality. So when you look at pictures of the children's houses in those days, although they're black and white pictures, you can see everything is white. The carers are all dressed in white. Even the children are in white. The walls are all white. And so there is an addition to the idea of the ideology, is that what we were looking for was a sterile atmosphere, a sterile place for the children to be outside of the illnesses and the malaria and so on going round. So it gives an extra identity, if you like, to the idea of the children's houses. Okay, what you're looking at now with is the focus on this building in the distance. This building was built by Israel's lottery, and it is a clubhouse for golden ages. That is people like me and Ivry.
Yeah, two old fogies.
They here there are activities. Let's move away. Here they have activities most days of the week. In the mornings there are lectures, there are Pilates classes, there are people who come in again talking about all various different subjects. We have 3 lunches a week are provided for us here. And the reason that I particularly mention this age group is because in the late 1980s, there was economic turmoil in the world. Israel, the inflation was about 400% a day, if you can imagine that. And two people in 1990 came along to the weekly general meeting of the kibbutz and suggested, why don't we take every month a sum of money and put it aside in the individual member's name as a pension fund? A pension fund? You mean kibbutz isn't from the cradle to the grave, but it's always going to look after me? And surely if I was to vote for this, what I am voting for is a lack of confidence in the very lifestyle that I've chosen to lead. I'm already saying this isn't going to last, it's not going to look after me, I need to set up a pension fund, which is not what the belief was all about. So now there's a whole discussion. After all, this money could be used for other things. It could be used for improving our education. It could be used for improving our food, our building. And so we had to have this discussion. What should we do? And the question is posed, what did we decide? Well, the decision at Amiyad was yes, to go ahead and open the pension fund. Most kibbutzim, this issue never came up. And many kibbutzim, where it did come up, it was, thrown out. So not too many kibbutzim went that direction at that time. And unfortunately, the economic situation got worse, and there are horror stories of some kibbutzim who could no longer afford to look after the people who were no longer in the workforce. So it's a good job we went that way. All right, we're going to move on from here. We've come back to the beginning. We're in agriculture. You can see here behind me the what some might think is a water tower, but in fact, of course, it's a silo which produces silage. That is, all the green stuff that's left over from the fields goes up to the top and down and becomes warm as it's compressed, and they tell me that the cows love it. Of course, it's not in use now, nor has it been for at least since 1968. I mentioned 1968 because over here, what you can see is what used to be Amiyad's dairy, which closed in 1968. Working in the dairy is getting up at 4 in the morning, getting on down here, cleaning out, bringing in the cows, milking at first by hand, and then by machine. After the milking, the cows were sent out into the fields, and then of course you go out into the fields, you check out the fences, that everything's fine in the fields, and the day goes by, and then we're ready for our second milking. And so it goes on through the cleaning and checking everything out through the day, and you might get home about 5 or 6 in the evening. This was the kibbutznik. His hands were dirty, with the sweat of his brow, he would get home. At the very beginning, I mentioned the central theme of labor to the idea of kibbutz, that this was what was going to redeem the Jewish people. But from the kibbutz itself's point of view, this was the idea that earned the respect and honor of the community. That is to say, you could be in one of these general meetings and we could be having a large discussion, maybe even about the tractor of the manager of the orchard. And you could sense that that person who put so much into his day's work, that people were listening. It was important to them what he was saying. And then someone else would come up with an opinion, someone who people thought, well, didn't always arrive on time at work, didn't take on too much responsibility, wasn't too conscientious at work. And you get the sense that people weren't quite listening the same way as they had been to the other. I'm exaggerating, but nevertheless, there was this sense of honor and respect given to the worker, the person who was known to and seen to work hard, as a central theme. In 1968, here in the dairy, a couple of people were ill and we could no longer find anybody to work these hours. It wasn't the only reason, but it was a major factor in the closing down of the dairy. Now, in the early 1950s, it was clear to most kibbutzim that agriculture alone, we weren't going to make it. And so therefore, we began to look into, horror the word, industry. Do you go back to those early days in the industry? Industry. And so kibbutzim began to look around for various industries that they could either buy into, or some kibbutzim partnered together to set up an industry. Here at Amiyad, it started organically. That is to say, in the early 1950s, we began to first plant the citrus groves. Up until then, the major system of irrigation was what's called flood irrigation. You just open the tap and flood the fields. By then, it was understood that that's not a good idea. And here in Israel, we developed the drip feed system of irrigation with a pipe with little holes. By each hole, there'd be a sapling or there'd be a tree. The only problem is, as the manager of the citrus grove found out, these little holes get blocked up by dirt, by sand, by organisms. And so the manager of the pardes, of the citrus, went down to the people in the metal workshop. There was a guy running it who was known to be lazy. What do I mean by lazy? He would look at something and say, why do we have to work so hard? There must be an easier way to do it. And he'd already started up a business for the kibbutz called Efficient Devices. And he would look, for instance, at the picking of the fruit, and he would see an aluminum ladder going up the tree, and the person climbing it, hardly reaching the fruit and then falling off the ladder. He devised a platform, a triangular platform, high up on wheels with a little ladder to go up it, and now you could stand there, move around, pick different things, much safer, safety. He actually got an award from the Minister of Agriculture for a prize, an industry prize for this. So he looked at the problem with the drip feeds, and he came up with the idea of a filter, a large filter. He put it on the end of the line, and sure enough, or the beginning of the line, I should say, and sure enough, now the holes weren't getting blocked up, the water was flowing, everything was fine, and then our neighbors came along, looked over the fence and said, oh, I'd like one of those. And that was the beginning of Amiyad water systems, which today is traded. It was on the London Stock Exchange. We brought it home to the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. It is active in 70 countries around the world. We have 10 wholly owned subsidiaries around the world. We produce in India, in Turkey, here in Israel and in China. And it is part of our life here today. Now, I'm coming now to a conclusion. I mentioned earlier about the demographic program that Amiyad has gone on, which appears to be successful. That is to say, people are coming from the town, not just our children, but young families with their children are coming here. If you ask them why they're coming, I think one of the major things they talk about is community, One of the things that's important to me, and I think also to some of them, is the idea that something important happened here, that the values with which this community grew up on are maybe to be looked at and seen, how we can take these same or similar values and project them into a new future. Obviously, we can't go back to the past, But maybe these values are important enough for us to project into whatever future we're working towards. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, any questions?
Many questions, but I've let you talk because you are so well informed. And thank you very much, Barry Coleman of Kibbutzamiyad in the northeast of Israel, on a shoulder of land overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Thank you very much, Barry.
Pleasure. So one thing I missed yesterday when we were walking around the kibbutz and the children's houses, when we talked about the fact that they also studied in the children's houses, the education system of the kibbutz then and still is today is based on 1920s educational philosophy of Montessori, of Dewey, which is child-based education. That is, the education is based on the environment of the child, of the things he's in touch with and comes into touch with. And this could be manifested by walking around the kibbutz, or learning everything that they come in touch with becomes part of the educational program and syllabus. And still, even today, the kibbutz schools use this as a basis of the philosophy of their education. So I just wanted to add that.
Another big bonus of kibbutz.
And one could add, in the context of meeting the new people who are today joining the kibbutzim and becoming members of the kibbutzim, new people, that is to say, new families with young children, one of the reasons that they will often cite for coming to kibbutz is because of the education. Because they look at this education and see that this would be ideal for them, for their children, and as a family. And it becomes one of the pulling effects of young families today to the kibbutzim.
Well, I can add to that. So this is another new educational and sociological challenge and role of the kibbutzim in Israel.
Absolutely.
Good morning. I'm here on my second day in the Kibbutsamiyad as a guest of Barry and Elaine. And what I can say is that I thought I knew a lot about kibbutzim. And in my opening episode of this channel, I said that I'm living the dream and that it's my journey of a lifetime. But now in Amiyad, after Barry showed me round and he did the regular tour that he does of groups who come to the kibbutz, it's not just a journey of a lifetime. For me, it's a voyage of discovery. Despite the fact that I've been 52 years and lived in 2 kibbutzim, I am discovering new things about kibbutz that I thought I understood. But as I go around and I talk with the people, I learn about these people and I learn about the kibbutz as a changing, developing and evolving society. So here I am in a very nice guest wing of Barry and Elaine's house. And yesterday I discovered that this kibbutz has in fact gone almost through to full privatization. I'll just show you. Barry told me that they own this house. This is the guest wing. Here I am. Good morning.
I want to thank Barry for showing me around Amiyad and explaining to the viewers the history and development of the kibbutz, and for setting up the interviews with 3 newcomers to Amiyad. That was Michal, Solly and Tomer. They will appear in a later episode. In the meantime, the next episode, number 4, will be with Noah and Mazal in Kibbutz Daphna. So in the meantime, goodbye, keep well and look after yourself.